Okay. We're live. We're going to try this again. No big announcements today. Not letting people know we're going live because we had so many problems on Friday getting things set up and getting things working correctly. Waiting for Eric to join in the conversation here. Today we are going to be talking. Oh, Eric is in the green room. Let me get him added to guest one here.
All right.
All right. Check, check.
Check, check.
I have got my bandwidth statistics up and running. Everything looks good.
Everything looks good. Except for I don't really look that good.
What? Well,
but that's normal. So
you can tilt. Well, no, don't. Because if you tilt the camera down, you're going to get disconnected. That always happens.
Oh, no. Actually, it's only if I hit the little light on it. So there we go. Oop. Probably too far.
There you go.
There. How's that?
Yeah. That's good. Yeah. So
Okay.
I opted to not go with the beta. I told you I was going to go with the beta.
Oh.
And as I was getting things set up, everything was looking good. But then I noticed that there was like this microsecond delay between my speaking and what I was seeing in the window here.
Oh, really?
And I switched over to the regular version. Actually, there's still a little bit of delay, isn't there?
Yeah, well, there is definitely a delay with me.
Yeah, see, and
that I noticed.
I don't see you delaying at all.
And I don't see you delaying either. So you look good.
What the heck?
So weird. I know.
What the heck? All right.
But before, I don't remember seeing me delay. So that's kind of odd.
Yeah. So I went so far as to craft a brand new custom-made 12-foot Ethernet cable to connect my MacBook Pro to the switch over there.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So we are, and I believe macOS gives precedence to Ethernet over Wi-Fi automatically.
Does it? I've had to always seem like I've always had to set it.
Because when I went into system preferences and network, it showed Ethernet
that it was the number one service
top. Yeah.
Well, you know what? Maybe it does. I don't know. It seemed like, well, maybe it does. I don't know. It seems like I've always had to rearrange services, but maybe that's just, me.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
But it's all good. So
I did it anyway.
Yeah.
I did it anyway. And so this is actually going to be really beneficial because the one thing I was not ready with the other day is like an intro. Having an intro to the show is super important to setting up the overall feel of the show. And I didn't have an intro. I was just going to wing it. And every time we started to record, and fortunately every time we started to record it failed, but every time we started to record, I was doing something different, and I was just trying to make stuff up off the top of my head, and it wasn't working. So I actually took the time to craft. I say that like I'm some sort of artisan or something. To craft an intro to this conversation we're about to have.
That's awesome. So you actually made your own Ethernet cable, and you did it because just to make sure there's no issue with connection
with Wi-Fi.
Yeah. That's causing any. Yeah, that's good.
I'd been doing Wi-Fi this whole time, but I thought, you know what?
Yeah.
Nope. I'm going to make a cable. I make cables all the time. I don't know if you do too, but it's I always have a roll of Ethernet cable sitting around, and I've got
I haven't made one in a while, but no, that's smart though.
I have a big bag of connectors. So any length cable I need, bam, I
Boom.
can make
You
it,
could do it.
which is great.
But do you have an adapter to go to the USB-C, or I'm sorry, Thunderbolt, or is that
Yes.
how you? Yeah,
Yes. I don't know if well, I probably can't bring it around. I have
yeah.
it propped up on this desk accessory because I didn't want it sitting on top of my power adapter.
Oh, smart.
I was
Yeah,
worried about interference from that. So
yeah.
I have it propped up about 8 inches from the power adapter.
Power adapter. Yeah,
Okay.
that's smart.
Yeah, so we are live. Okay, one last super important question before we get started. You ready?
Yes.
You ready for the
Yeah,
question?
I'm ready.
Okay.
I'm ready for the question. Yeah.
By the way, anyone tuned? I don't know if anyone's tuned in right now. Let's see. Anyone tuned in? Oh, there, it says there's one person watching. That's awesome.
Oh wow,
Hey, how you
that is
doing?
awesome.
We're just about ready to get started here. You
And
know
now he
what?
clicked off.
You know what? Yeah, probably. I bet it's Dave. Dave emailed earlier. I could be wrong, but Dave emailed earlier and said he noticed that we were going to be on, and we had a little conversation back and forth there. And I wonder if it's Dave watching.
It probably is. Maybe.
Okay, so anyway, so you heard in our multiple failed attempts at starting the other day, the title I had come up with for this episode.
Yes.
This is this is part of this is part of the pre-show setup that people normally don't get to see, but since August, since we're doing these live streams, people now get to see all this. So they get to see this decision-making process, this important process that we're about to go through. All right? And Dave just joined the chat room and said, "You're right."
It's me.
Now be careful, Dave, because I you know that ban button is one click away. No, I'm just
Yeah.
kidding. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. So here's part of that important decision making process. You heard the title I gave the other day, "Getting to the Core of the Apple." That was the title.
Yeah.
That's option
Yep.
one. Option two is "Here Be Dragons."
I like that one. Here Be Dragons is always,
You like "Here Be
you
Dragons"?
can't go wrong with that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's part of my notes because
Yeah. Core of
there's
the Apple's good too.
there's definitely, well, getting to the core of the apple is more punny,
Yeah.
and "Here Be Dragons" is more referential.
Yeah.
So, what do you think? I like punny. I mean, punny's always good.
I do too.
What do you think, Dave,
Yeah,
in the chat
definitely.
room? He's
Definitely.
laughing. He's laughing.
The punny one would definitely be your. That's always been kind of your niche. I mean,
We
you've
tend to go
always
punny.
kinda-
Yeah,
yeah.
we tend to go punny.
So
Okay,
you can't go wrong with that, like you said.
we'll stick with
don't
punny.
know. They're both good though.
Well, you know, like I said, it's referential. So I'm going to be mentioning in my notes. I'm going to be mentioning "Here Be Dragons." So
Yeah, it might be good to go with that one then.
it'll see the light of day. It'll see the light
Yeah.
of day.
So that actually, well, it's always good to, like, if you name your when you title your episode, to actually say whatever your title is at some point. So that, it might be good to go with "Here Be Dragons."
People think I'm kidding. This is literally an important decision that we make every single episode.
Oh yeah,
It's
yeah.
what should
No,
the
I don't.
title be? You know what? I mentioned core. Well, we mentioned core several times.
Yeah, that's true too. Yeah,
That's true too.
yeah.
All right, we're going to stick with the original.
point.
Let's not
So I get off track. Let's.
get off track. Let's get
Yep.
back on track. Let's get recording. Oh, by the way, the failed recording from the other day, I'm going to actually, I'm going to go ahead and release it on YouTube, so people will be able to go back and watch me vamping
Yeah.
and us trying to get you connected for an hour.
Yeah. Yeah.
The first
That
half
was,
hour of which will be me
oh,
vamping, and including, by the way, the episode number 3 of For Mac Guys Only essential apps list that I went through.
yeah, that was probably the one part that was worth it,
That's,
I
I
think.
don't know
If
if it was
any,
worth it.
yeah, that actually would have been worth the watch, but the rest of it, I don't know.
I don't know. I
Yeah,
don't
that
know.
was rough.
That was very rough. 2 in a row rough. So let's see if we can keep this from being rough here.
Yes, exactly.
All right. You know how many times look at how many times I've scratched out our start times. I do this for every single episode. This is another behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Dave is
They use.
bragging that he is AT&T fiber. So every episode, I have this stack. Well, it's a very low stack now because this started out as a brand new stack for Mac Guys Only. And every episode, I put the episode number, start, and stop. And that just makes it easier for me to go back and edit the audio because I know, okay, I can just jump ahead to this minute and we'll get right around the beginning and lop off everything in front of it.
Yeah.
So now I've wasted another minute talking about that. But that brings us exactly to 12 minutes into the recording process. So there you go. You ready?
Ready.
All right. Here we go. It's For Mac Guys Only, episode number 398 for October 30th, 2022. Getting to the core of the Apple. Hey everyone, welcome back to For Mac Guys Only, the show for the Mac community, where we share our thoughts and opinions on current Mac news and events. And joining me to talk Apple cores today is my For Mac Guys Only co-host, Eric Erickson. Hey Eric.
Hello, Mike. Try this again.
Yes, for those who are listening, this is our 4th or 5th attempt at recording this episode. We had all kinds of technical difficulties on Friday, so we are picking up again on Sunday.
Right.
and starting fresh. And for those of you who might be
will
joining
work.
us in the chat room, if you have any questions or comments as we move along, be sure to preface it with a Q or the word question, and we'll try to address it here on the show. So today we are going to continue the conversation of bringing new life to older Macs. Now this is actually kind of the next phase of our conversation. We had the first one back at the end of August when Nick joined us to talk about things that you can do to help improve the day-to-day functionality of Macs that can no longer be upgraded to the latest edition of macOS. And that included things like hardware and software upgrades, alternative apps, and even ways to put that Mac that's no longer your daily driver to use in other ways. But it's been a little while, and Eric, when you and I were talking about what to discuss this week, we decided that it was time to continue this conversation. So, this is the next phase of bringing new life to older Macs. And this is where we're going to be talking about bringing life to a Mac that Apple no longer officially supports, but is still a very valid machine. So, for example, a 2015 MacBook, or a 2014 MacBook Pro, or even a computer that you had, Eric, a 2013 Mac Pro, or in my case, a 2012. Go ahead.
Yeah, I had a 2012 MacBook Pro Retina as well.
Yes, still
Yeah.
an amazingly powerful machine, even though it's 10 years old. And in my case, I have a 2012 iMac. That's the Mac I have at the office. And while these are all far from being supported by Apple anymore, they still make excellent day-to-day productivity machines. But when you run a machine like that, well, any Mac really, when you think about it, you want to make sure that you're up to date, you want to make sure that you're secure, and you want to make sure that all software patches can be applied too. So, for example, patches to Pages, Numbers, and Keynote, or Final Cut Pro or Microsoft Office. You want to make sure that you can get those updates and that you can apply them to your Mac as well. So how do you do that? Well, that's what we're going to be talking about today. And the method that we're going to talk about in this segment of bringing new life to older Macs centers around an app called OpenCore Legacy Patcher. Now, Eric, you mentioned that 2012 MacBook Pro. I know you've played with OpenCore Legacy Patcher yourself. Was it on that machine?
It was actually, and yeah, and I installed Big Sur on it, and I thought, I probably should have just went ahead and did Monterey, but I did Big Sur because I thought that's going to be as big a jump as I wanted to do, and then I couldn't believe how flawlessly it ran after that. So
Yeah.
then it was like I should have did Monterey.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And, the nice thing is that you still can. Now, I've
Yeah.
used it on a couple Macs myself. But before we get into this discussion, I wanted to mention up front here that while this is not really a hard process, it can be quite technical at times. And so paying attention to detail matters. And I'm going to talk about that in just a second. But to put together this episode, I took a lot of notes. And I'm going to be using those notes as we move along. Now, the reason I mention this, Eric, is that because of this, I'm going to ask you to just jump in and interrupt me at any time to share your own thoughts, because I might start, getting going, and you won't have an opportunity to get a word in otherwise. So just jump in. Just jump in and share your own experiences, because of the nature of this, I wanted to make sure that I covered. Well, here's what I want to cover. I want to cover what it can do for us. I want to cover kind of what it is, what it can do for us. And I want to kind of cover how to go about determining if it's right for you to run on your Mac, and also kind of the process. And interestingly, the process of installing it is really going to be the shortest part of this conversation, because it really is pretty straightforward. But I wanted to make sure I covered all those things, and I covered them in a particular order, because the order in which you approach this, because of the somewhat technical nature of it, I wanted to make sure to get it, as right as I could for this conversation. So let's start with what is OpenCore. That's one word, actually, OpenCore. What is OpenCore, and what does OpenCore Legacy Patcher do for us? Now, OpenCore and OpenCore Legacy Patcher are very closely related. They're both repositories of the same GitHub account. I think that's the right terminology. I was trying to figure this out. They each have their own section within a single GitHub account, and they're under repository. So I think that's the right terminology. They're not listed as projects. So I'm not really sure, but they're from the same development team. Does that make sense, Eric?
Yeah, that makes sense. And that would be correct, I think, what you just said there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the one thing to know about OpenCore and OpenCore Legacy Patchers, even though they're very closely related, and in fact, Legacy Patcher depends upon OpenCore, they do differ in one very important way. OpenCore has been around for quite some time, and it's designed to help an adventurous nerd create a Hackintosh. That's really what it was designed to do. And it does this, and I'm quoting here, it does this by injecting new data for macOS, such as SMBIOS, ACPI tables, and kexts, or drivers in regular terminology. Apple calls them kexts, we call them drivers. Or maybe we call them kexts. I don't know. But that's
or kernel extension.
Kernel extensions,
Yeah.
aka drivers. How about that?
Sounds good.
And it injects all these into the boot process. It's a bootloader, and it injects all these into the boot
Yeah.
process,
Yep.
sometimes in memory, sometimes on disk, so that macOS can run on a Hackintosh, essentially.
Yep.
Now, in an even more here's a more succinct description from their site. OpenCore is a sophisticated bootloader used to inject and patch data in memory instead of on disk. This means that we're able to achieve a near-native experience on many unsupported Macs. That's actually kind of important. A lot of these tools that adventurous nerds, as I call them, use to create Hackintoshes don't don't put this boot process into memory, and sometimes that can lead to a slower overall experience of booting Mac OS. This all boots into memory, and there are no firmware changes. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. No firmware changes, and it's all very, very fast because of that. And it's all very undoable. That's the other important thing. Now, OpenCore Legacy Patcher. So we have OpenCore and OpenCore Legacy Patcher. OpenCore Legacy Patcher is an app that helps an adventurous Mac user breathe new life into older Apple manufactured hardware with the help of OpenCore. So OpenCore Legacy Patcher makes the job of using OpenCore with an older Mac, an authentic Mac, incredibly simple. Because in a very small nutshell, the OpenCore Legacy Patcher app does a number of things for us. One, it helps create a macOS installer flash drive, and it does so using packages direct from Apple servers. Second, it patches that flash drive and it creates a replacement boot manager that runs in memory, as I mentioned, not off a disk. So it's very lightweight and it's very fast. And then third, this replacement boot manager is what loads macOS and adds support within the Mac's memory and on disk in some cases, which we'll talk about that briefly in just a little bit, for hardware found in these older Macs that's no longer supported by macOS. So that would be things like processors, video cards, Wi-Fi, Ethernet adapters, and so on. So all this stuff that Apple is pulling support from in macOS as they lop older Macs off their supported list is being re-injected into your Mac by way of OpenCore Legacy Patcher. That makes sense?
Yeah, which is really cool, actually.
It is really cool. Now,
Yeah.
initially, the booting of your Mac via OpenCore takes place entirely off the flash drive. But then the nice thing is you can later patch your Mac so you don't depend on that flash drive any longer, and it's no longer required in order to boot it. And
Right. When I first set it up, I thought, oh my gosh, am I going to have to boot off this flash drive all the time? And then
I know, right?
realized, oh, no.
In
Yeah.
fact, I'm going to mention right up front here that the very first time I went to use it, it was a complete and utter failure. I tried to use this in my 2015 MacBook, and I could not get the thing to boot. It crashed every time. And more importantly, I thought I had bricked my MacBook. I thought I completely destroyed it, not realizing very early in this process of experimenting with OpenCore Legacy Patcher that it's not permanent. That, you know, by attempting to boot off the flash drive and attempting to get macOS, I think it was Big Sur I was playing with at the time, attempting to get Big Sur installed, I wasn't making any permanent changes to my Mac, no permanent changes to the firmware or anything else that would brick it. I was simply installing Big Sur, and without OpenCore Legacy Patcher, ending up with a Mac that's not going to boot in the end. And that's exactly what happened.
That's,
It just, I could not get it to work. But the neat thing was I pulled out that flash drive, rebooted, and reinstalled the proper supported version of macOS, and everything was fine. So,
yeah.
but yeah, my first experience with OpenCore Legacy Patcher was a complete and utter failure.
It's a little scary before that moment, though. It's you
Yeah.
probably realized you weren't breathing until it actually booted up.
That is very true. Yeah, I really wasn't. Now the good thing is I was experimenting on a Mac that wasn't super important to me anymore. It has a battery that's failing. It never was a very powerful machine. The 2015 MacBook was never super powerful. I had already moved on to the 13-inch MacBook Pro as my kind of daily portable driver. It still works. It still works fine, but within the limits of the hardware as it was designed. In other words, the slightly weaker processor, the lower memory, the lower storage. It never was a very super powerful machine. The smaller display. It was a great machine
Right.
for what it was, but I had very quickly moved on to something else being my daily driver because I realized that it wasn't quite as powerful as I needed. So I wasn't panicking that much when it wasn't working. I was more aggravated and frustrated that I might have destroyed this MacBook that was otherwise working, right?
Right.
But it turns
Yeah.
out that there's a lot of safety features built into this process that help you get around problems when they occur. And while we won't cover all of that, there are we will talk about briefly some of the sections of the OpenCore Legacy Patcher website where they talk about how to update OpenCore and install patches for it, as well as how to uninstall it. So this is all part of doing your research, and we'll talk about that too in just a moment. So for those who want to dig further into how all of this works, as I just mentioned, I'm going to link to the documentation of OpenCore Legacy Patcher that not only describes the terminology, it describes the boot process, but it also describes what patches are being applied during the boot process of your Mac. Okay, so all that sounds great, but I also wanted to point out that because of how OpenCore is built, one of the very cool things about it versus some of the other Hackintosh tools that are out there is that OpenCore supports System Integrity Protection, or SIP. It supports File Vault 2, and it supports Secure Boot. The other thing
Which
that
all
I
those are
learned,
huge.
oh, those are absolutely all huge. And
Yeah.
in some cases, they might suggest, depending on the Mac that you're trying to work with, they might suggest reducing the level of protection that System Integrity Protection provides you. But this is all very Mac specific. Some Macs, you don't have to disable it at all. Some you might want to disable it. Some you might want to reduce the level of protection that it provides. And it all comes down to the age of your Mac and the hardware that's within that Mac. But the beauty of it is that's all detailed on their site. The other neat thing that I found out, and I didn't realize this until I was doing research for this episode, is that OpenCore Legacy Patcher has its own feature called Vault. Or maybe I should say OpenCore has its own feature called Vault. And what you can think of Vault of is it's like SIP or Secure Boot for OpenCore, in that nobody can come in and modify it without your permission. So I thought that was a really neat way to add a little extra security and add a little extra assurance to the end user for the overall security of your Mac. I thought that was nice to have that in there.
Yeah.
Now, the other neat thing about it, and I kind of discovered this accidentally too as I was getting it to work on that MacBook for the first time, is that you might find that features of macOS that you never expected to work now work on your older Mac. So things like Sidecar, things like AirPlay, things like Universal Control, a lot of these things work on hardware that even if you are using a Mac that can run this version of macOS, Big Sur or Monterey or Ventura, many of the older ones, Apple says, oh no, you can't do Universal Control, you can't do AirPlay, you can't do Sidecar, whatever. That's a determination that Apple makes based on the model of Mac that you have. So even though, and you know, this is true for the iPhone and iPad too. If you have an older iPad, you're not getting Stage Manager, right? So this is a determination that Apple makes. Well, with the OpenCore Legacy Patcher, the interesting thing is that even if it is supported hardware, if you install Mac OS, Monterey or Ventura by way of OpenCore Legacy Patcher, you might actually get some of these features to work. Now, I'm not encouraging you to do that. If you have a Mac that's officially supported by Apple for Ventura, for Monterey, don't do this. Don't go this route. What we're talking about here today is a possibility for bringing life to a Mac that is no longer supported by Apple. Okay.
Right. And some of these things too, like you said, that they work. It's kind of a, and I wouldn't say an iffy thing, but some things that Apple says won't work actually don't work. And then other things that they say don't work, they do work. They just tell you that it does, so it's kind of hard to know, so it, yeah.
Absolutely. And sometimes it's a software decision. Sometimes it's a usability decision. I don't think Apple makes any of these decisions necessarily lightly. I think that through testing, they determine that the experience that a user might have if they try to run Stage Manager on, let's say, my 10.5-inch iPad Pro, that doesn't get Stage Manager.
Right.
I'm sure they've tested it. I'm sure they've determined that, look, if we try to implement Stage Manager on that 10.5-inch iPad Pro, even though Mike already dislikes Stage Manager, he's going to dislike it even more.
Even more. He'll hate it then.
He'll absolutely hate it if we put it on that 10.5-inch iPad Pro. Now, I mentioned this a couple times already, but I feel it's super important to mention again, is that because OpenCore loads into memory, none of this is permanent, and it's all easily undone. So there you go. Now, here's the cautionary tale. Here be dragons.
Yeah.
I don't really want or intend to discuss the gray area of all this. Okay?
Right.
There are some warnings here. So let's start by saying that Apple licenses macOS to run on Apple manufactured hardware. And that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about building a Hackintosh. We're talking about running macOS on Apple manufactured hardware. Okay. However, Apple doesn't intend for you to patch macOS to run it. Nor does Apple intend for you to run Monterey or Ventura on hardware that's not on the supported list. So this is very much a gray area. In the little bit of research into this that I did, and again, I don't intend to discuss this gray area too much, but in the little bit of research I did, this is a licensing issue, not necessarily a legal issue. There doesn't seem to be a law that says you cannot do this. But there is an agreement that you make with Apple by way of their software license agreement that says you will run macOS on Apple manufactured hardware. And I suppose it could be inferred. I don't think it explicitly says, but it could be inferred that within that agreement, you're running it on hardware that Apple says is supported by that version of macOS. And that's all I'm going to say about that. So if you do this, go ahead, Eric.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, which, if you're just updating one of your own Macs, that really shouldn't be a problem. I mean, obviously people, I don't know how, it's probably an issue if you try to, let's say, use the OpenCore Legacy Patcher and update a whole bunch of other people's Macs and maybe make money off it or something like that. But I think it's probably not a big issue if it's just, hey, I want my older Mac to run, Big Sur or Monterey or, Ventura or whatever, and I think it's probably fine. Like you said, it's probably a licensing thing, not necessarily a legal thing. You're not going to get sued into oblivion or thrown in jail or whatever.
Yeah, I don't want to say. I don't think the Apple cops are going to come knocking on your door.
Right.
But you're quite the mind reader, Eric, because I was literally just about to say, if you do this, first, it should be done for personal use only. Second, it should be done on hardware that is not intended to be your daily productivity machine. And third, and this is super, super important, this will get the Apple cops knocking on your door. It should not be done for a profit in any way, shape, or form. Do not go purchase old Macs on eBay, load them up with Ventura, and turn around and sell them. That is not legal. That is not something you should do. And again, this should only be done for personal use and probably not on your main productivity machine. Okay.
Right.
That's a couple dragons. Now, the other is you should expect that there are going to be issues. A Mac that's not equipped to run Monterey or a Mac that's not equipped to run Ventura, in other words, a Mac that doesn't have enough memory, doesn't have enough processing power, doesn't have enough storage, or even one using a traditional hard drive, may not run it well. Just might not work all that well. And then along those lines, when a point release comes out, it's super important that you don't rush to install it. Apple may actually break compatibility with your Mac at any moment. Now, this is not something that happens when you're running macOS on supported hardware. When you're running Ventura on supported Macs, Apple is not going to break things on you on purpose, anyway, when they release a point release. Sometimes things break when they do it, but it's not intended to break.
Right.
However, this actually happened with my 2012 iMac when Apple removed NVIDIA Kepler support midstream. So macOS 12.4 ran fine. macOS 12.5 broke things. And that would not have happened running unofficially supported hardware because Apple knows, hey, we can remove NVIDIA Kepler support because none of the supported Macs use that video card.
Are using it. Right.
Are using it. So it's important when a new point release of macOS, or heck, when a new version of macOS comes out, pay attention to the OpenCore site. Pay attention to the changelog. Now, again, this is where it starts to get a little technical. You can't just casually jump into upgrades. You have to always pay attention when an upgrade is released. Make sure you bookmark that changelog and be prepared to download new versions of OpenCore when necessary. And also be prepared to not always be on the latest and greatest version of macOS while issues are being worked out. So if you were to actually go and look at the changelog now, I just mentioned the Kepler support being removed from macOS. If you were to look at the changelog now, you would see that OpenCore Legacy Patcher 0.4.9 issued a warning. They flat out said, don't install this. Don't install these upgrades. Don't install 12.5. Don't install 4.9 of OpenCore Legacy Patcher because you're going to break your NVIDIA Kepler card. And what it was acceleration.
Yeah.
So in other words, your Mac would boot, but accelerated graphics didn't work anymore. So now the interesting thing was that was on July 20th. On August 6th, it was patched with version 4.10. So now in my case, and it's not always going to be that fast, by the way, in my case, the delay between the driver removal and OpenCore fixing the problem, in other words, getting the correct drivers necessary to fix the problem and get them added to the legacy patcher and get the process of injecting them into your Mac so that your Mac could have accelerated graphics, well, that was a mere couple weeks. But, you know, again, I consider that very lucky timing. This is not something I should have even counted on ever coming to it. And that's one of those dragons to be aware of.
Yeah, and that's a good thing. I mean, it's really actually because and I think that's just the risk you take running a later OS on on older hardware, and it's just something you have to be aware of. The fact that OpenCore Legacy Patcher takes care of some of that and actually kind of has your back is kind of amazing. I mean, it really, because I mean, they don't have to do that either.
No.
It's just,
no.
Yeah.
And every time something breaks, when Ventura came out, they said, we don't know when or if or ever this is going to be supported. They're always very clear. We don't know.
Yeah.
This is broken. Who knows when it will be fixed? These are apparently some whip-smart developers, though, because I have seen incredibly rapid development on their part, but that could stop at any time. So it's just something to be aware of. So pay attention. Pay attention to the site, especially when a point release comes out. Okay, one last dragon. Well, I don't know. It might not be the last one. There may be a couple more dragons in here. But when you install a new version of macOS on a supported Mac, you are getting that operating system from Apple. And when you get that operating system from Apple to install on Apple manufactured hardware, there is a certain level of trust that we put into Apple to assure that we have a safe, secure environment. Now, OpenCore Legacy Patcher is a third-party tool. And think about it. It's a third-party tool that is specifically designed to inject new code into Apple's operating system in order to add compatibility for older hardware. Now, if you're going to do this, you definitely have to have a certain level of trust in these developers to assure that you are running a safe, secure environment. Okay. So in the case of OpenCore Legacy Patcher, what we're working with here is an open source project. Open source projects generally allow anyone to review the code. That's super important. They allow anyone to add to that code, and they allow anyone to scrutinize these projects for flaws. Now, there's other benefits, but that's just kind of a nutshell. This is some of the benefits of OpenCore or open source projects. Now, if code is submitted, if a third party submits code to an open source project, it's reviewed by those who maintain the project, and then a decision is made if it should be added, or if it should be modified or improved, or if it shouldn't be added at all. That's that's kind of generally the process. People can review the code, they can see opportunity for improvement, they can submit their own patches to it, and then the maintainers decide, hey, is this patch, one, is it well written? Does it meet our coding standards? Does it do what the person says it's going to do, or does it do something different that we don't want it to do? In other words, does it introduce a security flaw or something like that? Or is it good? Is it okay? But we can make it better and then add it into the project. So there are levels of review. From anyone can go view this project on GitHub. You can look at the code. You can see what it does.
Yep.
And then if you are a coder, you can contribute to the project, which is great.
Yep.
Okay. Now, unlike other open source projects like, let's say the Linux kernel, Mozilla Firefox, LibreOffice, etc., OpenCore Legacy Patcher is a smaller project. Now, being a smaller project means that there were fewer eyes on it. There were fewer eyes looking at the code to see if there are things that shouldn't be there. Now, based on what I've seen, and this is just my personal observations, this is not a recommendation, but based on what I've seen, it appears as if the project is active. It's a vibrant community. There's no malicious intent. But even still, coding mistakes can happen. We see that with Apple themselves.
Yep.
We get security patches for macOS because coding mistakes happen. Coding mistakes happen in Microsoft Office. It happens in Pages. It happens in every single software project because, guess what? Software projects are written by humans.
Yeah.
And humans make mistakes.
Software's hard.
Software is dang hard. Software is dang hard. And now think about what they're doing. Think about what they're doing with this project. So it is a vibrant community. There's a lot of people using OpenCore to create Hackintosh computers. The benefit of OpenCore Legacy Patcher is that, like Apple developing macOS, there's a limited number of machines upon which it can run versus the PC world, the Hackintosh world, where there's this myriad combinations of hardware that can be put together and people expect to work. Here we're very limited. We know what Apple puts into their hardware, and so I think that in some ways might make the project a little easier for them, but this is still incredibly difficult what they're doing. So yeah, I have seen no evidence of there being malicious intent. I have seen references to them performing their own security audits. I don't know how those audits are carried out, but I do see that. We do see their Vault feature that allows you to lock down, or does lock down, the boot manager, the OpenCore boot manager, so that it can't be modified by a third party. And that there's no firmware patching, I think helps ensure the integrity of your Mac, because everything's done in memory. Nothing is permanent. So the last thing I want to mention about this Dragon is that whether you trust the developers and the project to do right by you is a decision that only you can make. We're not making that decision for you. It's something you have to weigh very heavily if it's something you want to attempt. If you have a spare Mac, it's a fun project. If you want to try it on a productivity machine, it's great. All we can do is share our own experiences and tell you that this is something that you can do, but there are some dragons and there's some things that you need to be aware of. Now, that was a lot of dragons that we just shared. But one thing I wanted to point out, there's a big pro to this. And that pro is that you are prolonging the life of hardware that's perfectly capable of running Monterey or Ventura, even if it's not blessed by Apple to do so. So you might get another few years out of it, but you will. I heard someone say about OpenCore, and specifically OpenCore Legacy Patcher, look, if you do this, yeah, you're going to get some extra life out of your Mac, but you're going to be on borrowed time. And I thought about that. I said, yeah, that's true. You are borrowing a little extra time for your hardware before you have to throw it away, before it has to be recycled. Something that is great hardware, but no longer supported by Apple. You're borrowing time for that hardware. But as I thought about it, I was thinking, you could say the same thing about any new Mac, new iPhone, or new iPad that you purchase at an Apple store today. The life of
Right.
that hardware is in Apple's hands. And whether it's 3 years from now or 6 years from now, the new Mac that you buy today is always going to be on borrowed time too. So that's just something to keep in mind as you
Right.
consider whether it's worth pursuing this or not.
And the thing of it is too, in the case of my 2012 MacBook Pro, I did it because my daughter, where she worked, there's a guy going to school, and I think he's becoming a developer or something of that sort, or maybe hardware. But anyway, he needed a computer and he didn't have one, and he was trying to look at Macs and of course trying to find something. And I said, well, I've got this one. And then I looked into OpenCore Legacy Patcher because I thought, okay, I'm stuck at, I don't know if it was El Capitan or where it was,
Yeah.
installed Big Sur on it, and it needed a new battery. But, we gave him the Mac and he got a battery. He actually installed it himself. And I think he saved a little bit of money that way. But, it's perfect. It works great for him, and it's
Yeah.
helping him get through school. And like you said, yeah, it's a borrowed time, but it's, in his case, it's the only thing, and it works terrific for him, and it suits his needs. And like I said, after I installed it and I saw how well it ran, I was like, oh my gosh, because I was thinking this is either going to be murder to get it on here, or when it runs, it's going to run so slow that it won't be
Right.
even. But it wasn't like that at all, and so I was really, really impressed.
Now that 2014, you said, right?
2012.
Oh, 2012. Now, was that a
2012 MacBook.
hard drive or solid state drive?
No, this is solid state. It's a 2012 MacBook Pro Retina. It was
Oh, okay.
the first Retina machine, and they didn't have a optical drive in there, and it came with an SSD, which I think at the time was like 768 gigabyte. Yeah, I think was the biggest at the time
That's pretty big.
that I got. Yeah,
Yeah.
actually, it's not too bad. And I think it's got 16 gig of RAM, and it just it works well for him and for what he's doing.
Well, and if you think about it, it really does work to Apple's benefit as well. Now, they may not think so. They may have thought that he should have just run
Right,
out and purchased a new MacBook Pro right then and there. But
right.
I would wager to guess that he wasn't going to do that. I would
No,
wager
right,
that if this were not an option, that he may have purchased a Dell or he may have purchased something else,
right,
and not
right.
purchased a MacBook Pro. A MacBook Pro is a big investment. But
It
what
is.
happened in giving him this? In giving him this MacBook Pro, 2012 MacBook Pro running Big Sur, what you're doing is help lock him, and lock is not the right word, help secure his
No, but
position in the Apple ecosystem.
exactly,
He's going to
exactly.
fall in love with the integration of everything. He's going to fall in love with how well macOS
Right.
and the iPhone and iPad all work together. And when he's ready to get a new computer, he's not going to look at a Dell. He's going to look at a 13-inch or
Another
15-inch
Mac.
MacBook Pro, or 16-inch, I should say, MacBook Pro, or a
Yeah.
MacBook Air or something. But he's going to make an investment in Apple versus an investment elsewhere. And so, in a way,
Right.
and I know I'm projecting here. I know I'm just guessing, but I think you probably have helped solidify a relationship between that user and Apple for many years to come,
Yeah.
because you were able to
Yeah.
supply him with
I,
something that was going to work well and was reasonably up to date. Now, in my
yeah.
case, I upgraded that 2012 iMac at the office. Well, one, it's been running great. And one of the reasons it ran great was because I replaced, and we'll talk about this in just a second, No, let's go ahead and talk about this. Let's go ahead and talk about this because part of getting ready for OpenCore Legacy Patcher is a little bit of prep work. And a big part of that prep work is what we talked about getting ready for Ventura an episode or so ago. And that is
Right.
backup, 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 backup. Make clones, make time machine backups, whatever. Just make sure that every single darn thing on that Mac is backed up so that when something goes wrong, like it did with my 2015 MacBook, you can recover. You can put things back the way they were because you took the time to make that backup. So that's the first step in prepping for something like this. It's the first step in prepping for a regular macOS update. So make
Right.
sure you do it, especially make sure you do it if you're going to try something like this. Now, the other way to look at it is if it's not your primary machine, you might say, you know what, I'm just going to start it fresh. And that is a very valid way to go. In fact, the OpenCore Legacy Patcher only officially supports installing it one of two ways. One, a fresh install, or two, an upgrade. That's it. They don't support cross-grading from any other Hackintosh type environments. They don't support, in fact, they don't even support older versions of Mac OS. They, let's see, they're officially support Mac OS 11 through 13. That's it. They don't support anything older than Mac OS 11. So, you know, you need to pay attention to that.
Yep.
Now, what I was just about to say about my 2012 iMac is I had upgraded the hard drive in that. It did have a 1 terabyte hard drive, standard, not Fusion drive, nothing like that, just a standard 1 terabyte hard drive. I replaced that with a 2 terabyte SSD. In fact, I was running that iMac off that 2 terabyte SSD connected externally via USB 3. That's
That's right. I
nuts.
remember that.
Nobody should do that. That's insane, Mike. Why did you do that? But
And you did that for a while too.
I did it for like 3 years.
Yeah.
The thing is, it ran great. And the big
Yep.
stopper for me was that I had the new glue strips. I had the tools to open it. I just didn't want to take the time. It takes like an hour to an hour and a half. If you're going to do it right and you're going to remove all the old glue holding that glass screen onto the iMac, and you're going to clean it all so that the new, they're like foam double-sided stick tape that you use to attach the display to the aluminum frame. If you're going to do that right, you got to remove every single scrap of the old double-sided tape, and then you got to clean it with alcohol and do all this stuff. And I just didn't want to take the time, quite frankly. And so I was running it booted externally, so I could always boot to the internal drive if I wanted to, but I booted externally to the USB 3 SSD. And this summer I said, you know what, this is nuts. I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm going to finally install this 2 terabyte SSD internally. I did it, and then I did the OpenCore Legacy Patcher on it. And I was able to put Monterey on this 2012 iMac. And it's been running fine. Now,
That's
I'm
awesome.
completely flying in the face of my advice. And that is, don't put this on a productivity machine. But I was in the situation where I couldn't afford to upgrade 2 Macs. And one of my Macs was in desperate need of a replacement. And that was my, it was actually a 2012 Mac Pro here at home. And I could very well have done the OpenCore Legacy Patcher route on that. I could have gone with an SSD. In fact, I even purchased an upgraded processor for it. And I didn't get around to installing it. It was like $30. And I didn't get around to installing it yet. I still will. But I was deciding between making an investment in the Mac Pro to make it more usable. I won't say bring it up to speed, but make it more usable, or replacing it. And I opted to replace it. Now that meant that my budget for new Macs was blown. I blew it on
Yeah.
replacing that older Mac Pro. And so now I have this 2012 iMac at the office, and I said, you know what? I'm going to go the OpenCore Legacy Patcher route. This is not, it is a primary productivity machine, but the productivity that I carry out on it is somewhat limited. In other words, it's primarily for checking email and checking in on client websites and, web-based work, pages, numbers, Keynote, Office, things like that. It's not really a higher end productivity machine. It's just kind of a daily driver type productivity machine. Whereas the one here that I was replacing, this is where I do Final Cut Pro editing. This is where I do photo manipulation. This is where I do, the higher end stuff that could benefit from a newer Mac. So I opted to use OpenCore Legacy Patcher on my Mac at the office. So two things. I replaced the hard drive with an SSD. And that's one of the questions is, should you do any hardware upgrades on your Mac? Can you do any hardware upgrades on your Mac? And what should those hardware upgrades be? And in general, it comes down to, can you upgrade the memory? If so, great. Can you replace the storage on it? If so, great. Upgrade that storage. In my case, I replaced a traditional hard drive with an SSD. I could do it. And the resources that you want to use to help determine if you can do it are a couple websites we've mentioned here on the show before. Everymac.com is a great resource to see what came within your Mac when it shipped from Apple. You can search by serial number, you can search by model, and you can pull all kinds of great information about from your Mac, including how much memory can be installed, can drives be replaced, things like that, what video card is in it. That's going to be super important as we go further into this. So everymac.com, ifixit.com, where they have repair guides and show you what can be done with your Mac, including videos and teardowns so that you can see the inside of your Mac before you actually attempt to open it yourself. And macsales.com, the folks at Otherworld Computing, also have great installation videos, and they are the only ones I'm aware of that carries a part that you're going to need if you replace the hard drive in your Mac, and that is a thermal sensor. If you replace the hard drive in your Mac with an SSD, you need to also install an inline thermal sensor on most models of desktop Macs. What it does is it tells the Mac that you have an authentic Apple drive in it so that it can regulate the fan speeds. If you don't install the thermal sensor, what happens is you end up with fans that just spin at high speed all the time. And it's very annoying. Yeah. I've worked on Macs that didn't have the thermal sensor installed, and you just hear the all the time. It's not broken. There's nothing wrong, but your fans are going to wear out sooner, and you're going to drive yourself crazy listening to these fans spinning all the time. So OWC, or macsales.com, sells kits if you have an iMac that include the foam tape, that include the thermal sensor, that include mounting brackets, and very often include the tools that you need to open up your Mac as well. So macsales.com, ifixit.com. iFixit does not sell the thermal sensor. They recommend the macsales.com one, and everymac.com. All great resources for determining what, if anything, you can do with your Mac before you attempt this. Let's say you're going to need a flash drive. That's important. You need a flash drive to install, to create the installer for macOS. And it should be minimum 16 gigabytes. So expect to spend about 10 bucks. About 10 bucks on that.
Yeah.
And then you need OpenCore Legacy Patcher. Okay, so I'm going to put a link to that in the show notes. But I thought I would go through a little breakdown of their website and just kind of point out some of the most important sections of it. Everything is broken down on the site including an introduction that talks about what is OpenCore. It talks about the general process. It's a four-step process. Four-step process, that's it, for how to get started with it. And one of the first things that they point you towards is the list of supported models. This is an excellent list of supported models. And you can click on MacBook, MacBook Air, MacBook Pro, Mac Mini, iMac, Mac Pro, and Xserve. Yes, even Xserve,
Wow.
to see if it's going to work with your Mac. And yes, Dave, I'll send that in just a second. He's asking if I can send him a link in the chat room. So what's nice is it'll tell you right off the bat. Let's jump to MacBooks. They started in like 2006, right? So let's start with the
Yeah.
MacBook.
Yep.
Right off the bat, we can see that the MacBook 1,1, 2,1, 3,1, which is mid 2006 through late 2007, flat out not supported. Can't do it. You cannot run OpenCore Legacy Patcher on them. Why? It tells you right there. It's a 32-bit CPU limitation and a 32-bit firmware limitation. Boom. That's it.
Right.
Then it moves on to the early 2008 through mid 2010 MacBooks. And it says, yes, that is supported for Monterey and older, with support for Ventura coming soon. That's under active development. And then you can see that mid 2015 to early 2016 MacBooks are fully supported. And you can go through this list for every single model of Mac. If we click on iMac, we can see that for the iMacs or MacBook Pro, you said mid 2012, everything's supported. Mac Mini, Dave mentioned in the chat room, he's got a mid 2014 Mac Mini. Yes, everything is supported. And then for the iMac, the support starts to begin in mid 2007. Believe it or not, mid 2007 iMacs can run Monterey with almost everything
Wow.
supported. Now, they also tell you, here's what you need to know. You have to have an SSE 4.1 CPU upgrade. The GPU acceleration is in public beta. Stock Bluetooth on those models is non-functional, and you may run into other issues. For example, 2009 and 2010, it says that the GPU is socketed, which is amazing. That is one of the best things about the 2009 through 2011 iMacs, is that they had socketed GPUs or graphics cards. And what that means is you can purchase a metal compatible
Change.
GPU to get better support for those models. So what I learned as I went through this list is that if you're considering, even for a moment, going with OpenCore Legacy Patcher, you're probably not going to want to do it unless you have a 2012 or later Mac. That's about the cutoff, is you want to have a 2012 or later. Anything before 2012, which was our cutoffs, Eric, you had the 2012 MacBook Pro, I had the 2012 iMac.
Yep.
We have the 2012 Mac Pro. Anything older, with exception of the Mac Pro, which has a little bit easier ability to upgrade and make changes to it, anything older than 2012 is probably not worth exploring unless you
Right.
really want to dig into it, replace hardware, replace video cards, replace GPUs, CPUs, I mean, unless you want to get into that. Yeah, it's amazing that you can get Monterey on a 2007 iMac, but yeah, going back to what you said earlier, you're probably not going to enjoy the experience.
No. I was going to say 2007. Is that before the? I mean, it was strange. Was it still the white iMac at that point, the white plastic, or is it the?
I believe.
Yeah, that's old.
I believe it was. 2009 was aluminum, but had the black back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, right. Yeah.
And then 2011
That's right.
had the Silverback.
Silverback.
Yeah.
That's
I think
right.
I got that right.
Aluminum glass.
Yeah. Anyway, so going through the supported models, this is part of your research to determine if you should go forward with this project. This is part of the prep. Go through the supported models, see what the gotchas might be for your model Mac, and then determine if it's really worth doing or not. I feel as if anything older than 2012, don't bother. Don't even bother.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's supported
It's not
models.
worth it.
Then they go into setting up. They talk about how to download and build the macOS installers. This is important. They talk about the process of downloading OpenCore Legacy Patcher. OpenCore Legacy Patcher itself will go out to Apple servers and download a copy of the macOS installer for you. You don't have to do it. It'll do it for
That's cool.
yeah, macOS 11 or later. And you can also supply your own. So if you prefer to download it yourself, you can do so. But it will do it for you. And when it's done doing it for you, it will also create the flash drive for you, which is great. So it will download the installer, it will finish installing it, and it will create that flash drive for you. Now, the other thing is we're kind of mixing steps here. You know what? I'm not going to talk about that next. So this is what it will do for you. You can get the OpenCore Legacy Patcher. You can create a macOS installer, and then using OpenCore Legacy Patcher, you can patch that installer flash drive so that you can attempt the install of Monterey or Ventura on your older Mac. Okay. Then it goes into the installation process. It goes into how to boot OpenCore and macOS. Again, read all of this. And it will even talk about post-installation. So there, for certain models of Mac, and remember I said with 12.5 or later, Apple broke the NVIDIA Kepler support.
Right.
So what do I have to do? I have to follow a post-install process so that after I do an update, if I do 12.6 or whatever is released, 12.5.1, whatever, I have to make sure I launch the OpenCore Legacy Patcher app. In fact, it will self-launch these days. It'll self-launch and say, hey, I see you just upgraded macOS. You need to follow these steps. You need to follow these post-install steps to make sure that your video drivers work properly. And it's a matter
Which is nice.
Yeah, it's super nice. It's a relatively new feature. I believe it came in version 4.4 of OpenCore Legacy Patcher. But it'll pop up automatically and say, hey, you got to do this. And it identifies the video card you have. In my case, with the iMac, it identifies the NVIDIA Kepler. It says we need to add these drivers to your Mac because Apple will remove them. When you do the update, Apple goes through and helpfully removes them from your Mac. And so you need to put them back again. So that's part of the post-installation process as well as post-upgrade process as you move forward with OpenCore. The other sections of the site that are very useful to go through, there's a section on macOS Monterey support. There's a section on macOS Ventura support. Both of those go into details of what model Macs have been dropped by Apple, as well as what the current status is. Here's the thing. Apple released Ventura on October 24th. Is that what it was? I think it was October 24th, right?
Yes. Yep.
It was a week ago, Monday. And if you visited the OpenCore Legacy Patcher website on that Monday or Tuesday, what did you see? Nothing. Nothing about it. A couple days later, hey, 0.5 is out. 0.5 gives you Ventura support. But then it also goes into here be dragons. They have their own dragons that they tell you about. They have their own issues that are not taken care of yet, but are in active development. So this is, again, super important. don't just leap into Ventura, leap into their website first. See what might be a problem and see if it's worth attempting this. And within a day or two of that, they had 0.5.1, which already started to add support for some of the models that they said weren't supported, but was going to be coming soon. So there's a lot of very active development going on with this. But it is very important to pay attention to the site and see what it says for current status. And one of the nice things about the new OpenCore Legacy Patcher is it will even come up and say, "Hey, you know what? Don't run me on this Mac. It's not going to work." And I think that that's great.
Yeah.
They don't allow you to go through the process if they themselves know it's not going to work.
It's not going to work.
So,
Which is really, I mean, they've gone through a lot of trouble of trying to make it as user friendly as possible. I mean, the fact that, they go out and can pull the Mac installers, it'll remind you to run, after you install an update to macOS, it'll remind you to, run OpenCore to, fix a driver, like you said, or just even tell you, hey, this isn't going to work. I mean, that's really slick. I mean, they make it about as easy as it can possibly be.
they really do. If you ever paid attention to the Hackintosh community and you paid attention to what people go through with Clover or even OpenCore or any of the other patches that allow you to create a Hackintosh, while I've never built a Hackintosh, I've never really felt the need to do it. If you pay attention to that community and you read what's involved, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm just going to buy a freaking
I know.
Mac. I'm not going to.
I know that's where.
I'm not going to go through all this. But they
Yeah.
really, they really add a wonderful support layer, as you said, on top of this process for official Apple manufactured hardware. This is not meant to be used on a Hackintosh. This is meant to be used on a genuine Mac.
And yeah, I've always felt the same way too with the Hackintosh. It just seemed like it was way more trouble than it was worth. I, you know, anytime and that was the whole thing too. Anytime you do an update, okay, now what's going to not work now? What's going to be broken? Because that totally happens with a Hackintosh and something like this where, it's older hardware and hey, can it run the latest? The latest and greatest, I think that's totally legit. And I think that's totally worth a little extra problems, but even then it doesn't have the problems that you do with the Hackintosh. So, which is nice.
There's far too many problems with Hackintoshes because very often the hardware that you're using was never supported by Apple in the first place.
To begin with.
The nice thing here is that this was all supported hardware at one time.
Right.
So,
right.
I think that makes, and I'm only guessing here, but I think that makes the overall process of bringing support a little bit easier for the development team behind this. But there you go. Further breaking down the site, there's a miscellaneous section. Things to pay attention to, working around legacy acceleration issues, troubleshooting, updating OpenCore and patches, uninstalling OpenCore. It even has a section on installing UEFI Windows 10 on it. And then has a section on universal control on unsupported Macs. So there's a lot of reading material here. And before you jump into this, it's definitely worth going through it. There's credit, how to support the patcher. There's the licensing information, and then there's documentation. And the documentation is what I was going to link to that I mentioned earlier, where it talks about the boot process. It talks about the terminology that we're using here. It talks about tested models on OpenCore Legacy Patcher. And it even goes so far as to explain the patches in OpenCore Legacy Patcher. So definitely read it all. If I were to say what sections to pay the most attention to, I would say documentation, supported models, setting up, installation and post-installation, and then, of course, the Monterey and Ventura specific issues. One last thing I wanted to mention is when you go to download it, it used to be that you had choice to get both of these, and I was kind of going through it today, and it looks like they're limiting it to only the GUI now, or graphical user interface. But you'll see the terms GUI, GUI, versus TUI, TUI. And if you have never seen the term TUI before, it's text user interface or command line interface. So if you see that, that's what they're referring to. There was a command line version of OpenCore Legacy Patcher, and then there's the GUI version or graphical user interface version. I don't see any reason specifically to go with the text-based or command line-based version of it. I say just get the GUI.
Right.
It's so much easier.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, don't make it any harder than it needs to be.
Definitely don't make it any harder than it needs to be when you're talking about something like this. Now, the last thing I wanted to cover today, and we've covered a lot, is, again, research and install. We mentioned this a few minutes ago. Check and double check, is your Mac compatible? Check and double check, is your video compatible? Are there upgrades you can do? Can you install an SSD? Can you install more memory? Can you change your video card? If you have an older Mac Pro, you definitely want to get a metal compatible video card, but you may have already done that because Apple themselves said, hey, if you upgrade the Mac Pro's video card to a metal compatible, you can go to, what was it, 10.14? 10.13, 10.14? I can't remember which one it was, where they said, you can't run this on your Mac Pro unless you have a metal compatible video card. And a lot of Mac Pro owners went out, myself included, and purchased a metal compatible video card so that we could continue to upgrade our Macs with official supported macOS from Apple. So you want to look into these things. Some of the iMacs, you can upgrade the graphic cards on them. You're going to want to create that flash drive. And again, the flash drive creation process is covered by OpenCore Legacy Patcher. There is a step within OpenCore Legacy Patcher to not only download the macOS installer, but to also create the flash drive. And then, so that's really step one. Download OpenCore Legacy Patcher. The current version is 0.5.1. Get a flash drive, 16 gig flash drive, and use the OpenCore Legacy Patcher to create a macOS installer. If you want to be safer, go with Monterey. If you are on the cutting edge and your Mac supports it, you can go with Ventura. But again, it's only been out for a week. Expect there to be some issues there. If you want to be a little bit safer, go with Monterey. So you create that macOS installer.
I wouldn't.
Go ahead, Eric.
No, I was going to say I wouldn't rush to that. I wouldn't rush to Ventura.
No, I'm not even sure I would rush to Ventura if it's officially supported on your Mac. And that's always been our advice here on the show is wait for that 0.1 release. Let us play with it. Let us experiment with it. I know folks like Dave from In Touch with iOS. He's been running beta versions, and that's fantastic. Let Dave do that. I installed Ventura on my MacBook Pro, this MacBook Pro that I'm working on right now, the day it was released. But I didn't rush to install it on my other Mac here at home. I didn't rush to install it at the office. I didn't rush to install it on my Mac, on my wife's MacBook Air. I want to see what kind of issues I'm going to run into with it first. Same thing with iOS. I installed iOS 16 on my iPhone, and then I knew 16.1 was coming, so I told my wife and daughter both, don't even bother. Just stay on 15, and when 16.1 comes out, do the upgrade then. And that's what we did. Give Apple a couple weeks to work out the bugs that weren't found in the beta testing. And I think that's pretty fair advice with Ventura as well. wait for that 13.1,
Oh yeah.
if not point 0.2. I know folks who wait for the 0.5 release. They wait almost an entire year
Yeah.
before they upgrade. So, certainly rushing into installing Ventura on something like an older unsupported Mac with OpenCore Legacy Patcher is probably not something you want to do unless it's purely
No.
experimental. Okay, so you use OpenCore Legacy Patcher to create that macOS installer. Then what you do is you go into the settings of OpenCore Legacy Patcher. It should identify the Mac that you are on. And that's important because when you build and install OpenCore onto that flash drive, you want to make sure that you're installing the stuff, the KEX files and everything else that you need for that Mac. So the installer that you're creating, this flash drive that you're creating, can only be used on the Mac that you are creating it for. Don't attempt to use it to install Monterey on a MacBook Pro if you created the flash drive for an iMac. If you then want to attempt to do it on a MacBook Pro, rebuild and install OpenCore on that flash drive. You don't have to reinstall macOS on it. You just have to rebuild and install OpenCore on that flash drive so that it's compatible with that particular Mac. And quite honestly, I didn't dig into these settings all that much at all. When I went into build and install, when I went into the settings, it identified my Mac and it kind of pre-selected, going back to what you were saying, Eric, about making it easy, it kind of pre-selected what I needed for that Mac. It made it very easy.
Yep.
And one of the things you want to make sure is checked, though, and at least initially, is show boot picker. That's important. Keep that checked.
Yeah.
And then after you change those settings, return to the menu and go ahead and build and install OpenCore to that flash drive. And again, the steps to do all this are on their site. Read them, pay attention to them, make sure you understand the steps before you try it yourself. But just follow the steps. Don't miss one. Make sure you're building and installing it on the correct drive. Don't build and install it on a drive you don't intend to. And then that's it. You reboot your Mac, and as you're rebooting it, you hold down that Option key, right? And you're going to get
the
OpenCore Legacy Patcher as an option. That flash drive is going to show up as an option. You're going to choose that. You're going to choose that EFI. And again, all of these steps are on their website. All of these steps have pictures associated with them. So as you're going through the website, make sure that you follow the pictures that they're showing you. You're going to see EFI boot. You're going to select that. Then you're going to select install macOS Monterey or Ventura or Big Sur or what have you. Then you're going to choose where you want to install it, your internal hard drive. Once you're booting properly, once your Mac is booting to Big Sur or Monterey or Ventura, and you've got, you're using the flash drive, as we mentioned earlier, you're using the flash drive at this point to provide that memory-based EFI, the extensible firmware interface, software-based version of it in memory. You're using the flash drive for that at this point. So at this point, the flash drive is required to boot your Mac. So what you do is you get a copy of OpenCore Legacy Patcher, you put it in your applications folder, keep it in there, it'll be handy in the future. Keep it in there, open it up, click on settings, make sure your Mac is selected, uncheck the show boot picker, and then go back to build and install. But this time when you build and install it, you're going to build and install it to your internal drive. This is one of those post-install steps you need to take after using OpenCore Legacy Patcher for the first time to install an unsupported version of macOS on your Mac. One of those post-install steps is to build and install OpenCore to your internal drive. Once you've done that, you can remove the flash drive. Your Mac will, at that point, boot from its internal drive from then forward. And then, if you need to, like I do with the 2012 iMac, if you need to, there will be post-install patches that you need to apply. And as I mentioned, either OpenCore will automatically tell you, "Hey, you got to install these patches," and you'll know if it's a video acceleration issue. You're going to recognize that it's not
Right.
running all that well.
You'll know.
So
Right.
you follow the steps to install the patches. You reboot one more time, and that's it. Now you have video acceleration. You've got whatever, your Wi-Fi or Ethernet or Bluetooth or whatever patches you need to install to get that support working will be installed, and you can boot your Mac like normal until the next time there's a point release. And then in most cases, you can install the point release without any problems. But when you do, if you have to do post-install patches like the video drivers or whatnot, you'll just need to reapply those. So that was a lot to cover. The general gist of it is create the installer drive, build and install OpenCore to that installer drive, boot to the installer drive, install macOS, run OpenCore again on your newly booted Mac, build and install it to the internal drive, and you're done. Short of any root patches at the end, you're done. So, does that mirror your experience, Eric?
Yeah. In fact, actually, when you're doing it and you're going through their step by step, and of course, every computer, just like every Mac, is a little bit different.
Yeah.
So you may have more to do or less, but it really was fairly straightforward. I mean, it like you said, you follow the steps, and a lot of the stuff, as you mentioned before, the things are selected for you based on your Mac. So
Right.
it really, outside of carrying out some steps and stuff, there's just waiting for things to happen. Obviously, to OpenCore to do its thing, and then for the macOS to install, but it's really really pretty straightforward. And of course, again, there's all these other, I don't know how you say it, like you said, let there be or not let there,
Here be
be dragons,
dragons.
because
Yeah.
there could be issues depending upon what kind of Mac you have and how old it is and everything else. But then again, a lot of this just may not even apply, and you could just go, install it straight away and not
Yeah.
even think about it.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. So you touched on this a little bit earlier, Eric. How do you feel your Mac runs after going through this process?
Like I said, when I installed Big Sur, I was surprised at how well everything ran. I just thought maybe it would be really slow and kind of laggy, and or work good for a little while and then slow down. But
Right.
it was great, and it could have been too. Again, I that particular case, that Mac already had an SSD in it, and it probably wouldn't have been as fast as, like, let's say, a new SSD, but it already had it in there. It's, as opposed to a spinning drive. But still, I was really impressed, and I would definitely say, if people are on the fence about it and it's something they would like to breathe new life into an old Mac because they want to keep it around, I definitely think it's worth looking at.
It's worth looking
It's
at.
certainly,
Yeah.
yeah,
It as we said at the beginning, it can be a bit technical sometimes. If you're confused by the process, just honestly, just read it again. There were a couple
right,
times I
right,
looked at the steps and I went, I'm not really sure what they're telling me I need to do here, and
right.
I'd step
Yeah,
back, read it again, and say, oh, okay, I get it. I see what I'm supposed to do.
I get it. Yep,
It's not
yep.
that different from creating a macOS installer, natively and installing macOS onto a supported Mac.
Right.
It's not that different, but there are some extra steps.
No.
And there are a couple little technical things to be aware of. And most of the issues you're going to run into will fall under that supported models list on the OpenCore Legacy Patcher website. So if there's a known issue, you're going to see about it there. If there's a known issue with Ventura, you're going to see it in the macOS Ventura support section. If there's an issue with Monterey, you're going to see it in that macOS Monterey support section. Again, read. Don't gloss. Don't gloss. Read. Make sure you understand the steps. Make sure you understand everything you need to do.
At it.
And again, not to beat on this too much, but have a backup. Make sure you have a backup. If you don't normally run Time Machine backups, if you don't normally clone your Mac's drive, download a trial copy of Carbon Copy Cloner or Super Duper and clone your drive to an external drive. Make sure Time Machine's running. Have a couple backups. Any critical files that are on it that you can't lose, offload them to another Mac, offload them to the cloud. Just don't put any of your data at risk for this kind of experiment. Don't jump into it with, blindfolded, in other words. Make sure you're ready and you have all kinds of belt and suspenders in place to keep those pants from falling down when all things go south.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly.
In my case, I think it runs fine. The 2015 MacBook, I talked about how underpowered it is. You know what? It's running Monterey just fine. The 2012 iMac, it's a 10-year-old Mac. It is running Monterey just fine. Now, I have encountered an issue. It's a very, very minor issue. And I honestly don't know if this is a bug in Monterey or if it's some sort of weird fluke that came about from running Monterey on unsupported hardware. But I found, or if it's a bug in Affinity, I usually run into this with Affinity Photo or Designer. It could be a bug there too. But when I open up a document and I want to save it with a new name or export it to a new file type, I found that sometimes when I get that file dialog up, I can't go into that box and change it. It just beeps, blip, 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 blip. It won't let me type into that box. So I end up saving it, hopefully not replace it. Usually what I do is I go to the original Finder folder and I'll find the original file that I'm trying not to overwrite and I'll rename it. And then I'll go ahead and save it, and then I can rename it from the Finder or wherever, but I cannot rename it from the file save or export dialog box. And I haven't quite figured out if this is a side effect of, and look, this is all unsupported stuff I'm doing. I can't turn to Apple and say, hey, dudes, this ain't working.
This isn't working.
I can't do that. And that's something to understand too. There is no support structure for doing this. You are your own support team.
That seems like that would be, I would think the save and, close or save and open dialog boxes, that's an Apple's purview. I don't think that would be an Affinity thing.
Yeah. And I'm, I want to say, and I cannot say this with 100% authority, but I want to say that this has happened on my Mac Studio. And that is obviously running an official release of Monterey. I want to say it's happened there.
Right.
But I need to pay better attention where I am when this happens and actually, document it so that I know.
You know what? Actually, I've had that same problem. Now that you mention it, I've had the same issue. In fact, I think I've given up on that. I use default folder anyway. And I just use that to rename my files because I know, I think that same thing where I couldn't type anything.
Yeah, it's bizarre.
It just wouldn't. It's really bizarre. Yeah.
I was chalking it up to a bug in Monterey, quite honestly. That's what I figured it was.
Yeah.
And then I realized that where I run into it the most frequent is on that 2012 iMac that is running in unofficial or unsupported version of Monterey by way of OpenCore Legacy Patcher. So it started to occur to me in the back of my mind that maybe it was related to that. But it would seem like if that were the case, it would be a much bigger, more prevalent issue than these occasional save dialog box issues that I'm having. So I kind of feel like it's a Monterey bug, but I gotta narrow it down. But that my point is, when you do something like this, you could run into some issues, and you just have to know that there isn't any support to try to resolve these issues. This is something that you're doing. It's not. It's an unofficial installation of macOS on older hardware, and if you're comfortable being your own support structure, which most users are, I would say most Apple users are very comfortable supporting themselves. They know how to Google, for example. They know how to look things up. They know how to provide their own support without needing to call, without needing to try to reach Apple, without needing to try to reach Microsoft or whomever. I think most people are comfortable with that now, that shouldn't be a big concern, but it's something to be aware of. There is no place to turn. Yeah. Now, I haven't run into anything, and I know you passed that MacBook Pro along, but I haven't run into anything that hasn't worked as a result of doing this. In fact, I've had more things work that weren't supposed to work than I've had things not work. So it's been a positive experience for me. But I'm gonna direct people back to the first half hour of the show where we talked about all those dragons and say, please, just be aware, understand that there will be issues. Just expect there to be issues. Right. And if you go into it without any blinders on, if you go into it saying, I know that there may be some things that go wrong, I know that I probably shouldn't be doing this on a productivity machine, I think you're going to be just fine. I don't expect there's going to be any issues at all. So there you go. That is what have we not covered, Eric? What about this process have we not covered that maybe people need to be aware of that you've run into?
I think you've covered everything. Actually, I can't think of anything offhand. No, I think it's a very comprehensive. If it's not here, if you didn't cover it, it's because it doesn't matter. It didn't matter.
If I didn't cover it, it's on the OpenCore Legacy Patcher website.
Right. That's true. That's also true.
Please use that as your resource first.
Right.
Now, we have something else to talk about on bringing new life to older Macs. We mentioned when we went through the supported models list here, we mentioned that there were some Macs that are even older, 2011 and older, going all the way back to 2006, that maybe wouldn't run Monterey or Ventura all that well, and you probably don't want to try it. Right. But there are ways to bring life to those older Macs. And that's something we're going to talk about in the next segment of this series, which is actually going to wrap up this series as far as I know. I can't think of anything else that we want to talk about. But the next segment is going to talk about how to bring life to even older Macs. And it works darn well. Here's a preview. I tried it on a 2009 iMac, one of those blackback iMacs we were talking about, and it is running amazingly well. Amazingly well. And that's what we're going to talk about next time. How about that for a teaser, Eric?
Yeah, that's a real good teaser. Makes me I know what it is, and it makes me kind of want to know what it is. So
it makes you want to try it, doesn't it? Well, we're going to talk about that next time. We're going to talk about that next time. For people, and you know what? For people who aren't comfortable with OpenCore Legacy Patcher, it'll be an option for you too. So we'll just extend the teaser by saying that. Now, before we wrap things up, I did want to mention a couple things here. We are heading into the holiday season. November and December. We're back on track now with this second and fourth Friday every month thing. Well, there's going to be some scheduling issues as we move into November and December with that second and fourth Friday. If we can, we're going to try to record extra episodes and get them released on time. And if we can't, we just may not do one. So that's something to be aware of. And the other thing to be aware of is that when we go live, it may not actually be the second or fourth Friday. And that's simply because of these holiday scheduling issues. We always give priority to family. We always give priority to our day jobs. And that's what we're doing there. So with that in mind, just know that there may be some scheduling changes through the month of November and December, and then we'll get back on track again. And I think that's all we need to say about that. One of the things that we're going to, here's how you stay on track of that. I wanted to mention this. That's not all we had to say about that. I want to say one more thing about that. Please, if you have not already, visit us on YouTube, youtube.com/FMEOTV. Visit us on YouTube and click subscribe. If you click subscribe, you can then opt, you don't have to, you can opt to get notifications when we go live. And that is the best way to find out when we go live. In fact, Dave in our chat room found out we were going to be live today instead of Friday because he got that notification from YouTube. So please, it would help us out if you go to youtube.com/FMEOTV and click subscribe and become a subscriber to our YouTube channel. Not only will you get the edited audio versions of For Mac Guys Only in the regular subscription feed through Apple Podcasts or what have you, but you'll also get the unedited behind the scenes recording process of each episode as well. Or even better, you get that opportunity to participate in the chat room just like Dave did for us today. So I think with that said, Eric, that's going to do it for this episode of For Mac Guys Only. I hope everyone enjoyed it. Remember, we both love to get your letters, so if you have any comments about the show, a tip to share, a software or hardware problem with your Mac, or you would like to share your thoughts on any happenings in the world of Apple, you can leave those comments in the show notes or drop me a line, mike@formacguysonly.com. And Eric, what is the best way for folks to get a hold of you?
For me, it's also eric@formacguysonly.com.
Excellent. And anyone else on Team For Mac Guys Only, all those email and social network addresses can be found on the Meet Team For Mac Guys Only page at formacguysonly.com. Thanks so much for listening, everyone. And thanks to Eric for joining me this episode.
You bet.
Stay subscribed, and we'll talk to you next time.